Steam bleeds from cracked pipework above a field medici station carved into the ribcage of a shattered manufactorum. The hiss of a rebreather keeps metronomic time against the scratch of quill on parchment, each sound marking the boundary between breath and silence. Blood runs off surgical gauntlets in thin, disciplined streams into reclamation buckets marked with Departamento Munitorum seals. Under caged lumen globes that flicker with each distant artillery impact, vellum cards sort the wounded into categories: green, amber, black. Life and death reduced to bureaucratic efficiency. Here, in the cloying atmosphere of recycled oxygen and industrial antiseptic, the Imperium conducts its most fundamental transaction. Life is not saved. It is purchased through a complex ledger of acceptable losses, bought on credit extended by the dead. The arithmetic is simple and pitiless. Our analysis reveals that maintaining one wounded Imperial Guardsman's breathing requires, on average, 4.7 other lives across the supply and rescue chain. These are not abstractions, but flesh and blood. The stretcher-bearers who brave sniper fire, the perimeter squads who spend ammunition and lives creating safe corridors, the Valkyrie pilots who risk flak-filled skies, the convoy crews who die moving medical supplies through ambush zones. Each breath sustained represents a calculated expenditure of human resources measured in tactical multiplication factors. Trooper Vex lies on the third surgical table, his flak armor peeled away to reveal the lasburn that has opened his abdomen with surgical precision. The energy weapon's cauterization prevents immediate exsanguination, a small mercy of physics. His breathing comes in shallow gasps, while combat stims manufactured on distant forge worlds flow into his bloodstream. The medici officer examines the Vox unit still strapped to his back, her fingers tracing serial numbers that determine his tactical worth. A Vox operator represents multiplication, one voice coordinating artillery strikes, directing supply drops, maintaining communications across entire company fronts. She marks his chart with practiced efficiency. Priority 7. Specialist equipment. The designation carries weight in the Imperium's vast accounting system. Then, under her breath, she murmurs an old Medicae catechism. One candle for a lighthouse. The phrase carries institutional memory. Individual preservation serves broader illumination, personal survival justified only through systematic utility. Beyond the immediate reality of surgical intervention, deeper mechanisms operate. Veterans whisper of classified Departamento Munitorum ratios, mathematical thresholds that authorize rescue operations based on resource expenditure versus strategic value. Some claim these formulas exist in addendums to the Imperial Guard uplifting primer. Others insist they live only in the calculations of commissars who weigh souls against ammunition tonnage. The ratio reportedly spikes for officers and specialists, drops to near zero for line infantry unless mass action protocols apply. Trooper Vex's pulse strengthens under treatment. His survival will ripple outward through supply chains, transport manifests, and casualty reports. The Vox unit crackles with incoming transmissions, coordinates, casualty assessments, reinforcement requests. Even unconscious, he serves as a conduit for Imperial coordination, his continued existence justified by tactical multiplication factors calculated in distant offices. Outside, engines idle, and explosions illuminate smoke-filled skies. More wounded arrive on improvised stretchers, their bearers already calculating which casualties merit dangerous evacuation journeys. The mathematics of preservation continue, each decision feeding the endless hunger of institutions that transform individual survival into systematic consumption. The quill scratches on, the ledger grows. We will trace both the human chain and bureaucratic calculus that determine who breathes and who pays the price. War transforms suffering into spreadsheets, blood into budget lines. To understand how many die to keep one alive, we must first map the institutional machinery that converts distant labor into battlefield salvation. The Imperium operates through interlocking systems of consumption and allocation, each feeding the others in an endless cycle of resource transformation. Here, mercy becomes a mathematical function, calculated through the cold arithmetic of tactical multiplication. The Imperial Guard functions as a vast consumption engine, processing human lives through standardized protocols of recruitment, deployment, attrition, and replacement. Regiments serve as digestive organs within this system, breaking down individual identity into tactical components: riflemen, heavy weapon operators, Vox specialists, medici orderlies. Each component carries calculated replacement costs measured in training time, equipment and allocation, and transport capacity. The Guard devours bodies, munitions, airframes, calories, and time, then converts them into territorial delay and strategic advantage. Above this machinery, the Departamento Munitorum operates as the Imperium's resource allocation authority. Their logistics officers maintain detailed matrices correlating tactical value against preservation costs, allocating fuel through edicts and quotas that move across star systems. Medical supplies receive priority ratings based on strategic multiplication factors, combat stims for frontline units, surgical equipment for specialist treatment, evacuation capacity for priority personnel. Every vial of antiseptic, every surgical clamp, every dose of combat stim represents resources diverted from alternative applications, ammunition production, vehicle maintenance, replacement personnel transport. The Commissariat enforces doctrinal compliance across all preservation decisions, ensuring that fear flows in the sanctioned direction. Their field manuals specify when individual survival serves imperial interests, versus when sacrifice becomes mandatory. Commissars carry authority to override medical protocols, redirecting resources from low-value casualties toward higher-priority operations. They maintain parallel casualty assessments focused on morale impact, propaganda value, and disciplinary examples. Field medicae serve as the system's triage arbiters, translating institutional priorities into immediate decisions marked by quill scratches on blood-stained parchment. Their training emphasizes resource optimization over individual outcomes, converting doctrine into incision and denial. Medical theaters become spaces where human suffering meets bureaucratic calculation, where green, amber, and black classifications determine who receives the Emperor's mercy and who provides it through sacrifice. Our methodological approach combines campaign logistics data, casualty processing protocols, and supply chain analysis captured from active war zones. We privilege the forms that move cargo and men, requisition orders, transport manifests, casualty reports, because paper decides faster than mercy. Where numbers are disputed, we triangulate between official documentation and field interviews, revealing how a single breath at the front line is amortized across manufactoria shifts, void transit risk, and perimeter attrition. We define keeping one alive across 3 distinct registers that reveal the complexity underlying apparent preservation. Biological preservation involves maintaining vital organ function against shock, blood loss, infection, and contamination. The relevant inputs are saline, stims, analgesia, clean blades, trained hands, and minutes not yet purchased by the enemy. Success measures include stable vital signs, consciousness levels, and projected recovery time frames within acceptable parameters. Logistical preservation requires justifying resource allocation in a system whose default answer is no. Here the inputs are signatures, seals, Vox authorizations, priority codes, airframe flight hours, and escort platoons sacrificed to create safe corridors. Each medical intervention competes against alternative resource allocations, becoming economically viable only when the preserved individual's continued service outweighs the cumulative costs of their treatment, evacuation, and rehabilitation. Institutional preservation operates at the highest level, where individual survival serves symbolic or strategic purposes beyond immediate tactical value. This involves preserving tactical or symbolic value that multiplies force, specialists whose survival coordinates batteries, banners whose survival recruits the next levy, icons whose survival feeds the cult that keeps the machine laboring. Some individuals receive preservation priority, not for their current capability, but for their institutional representation value. Our geographic scope encompasses the complete preservation pipeline from the blood-soaked realities of trench aid stations, where initial triage occurs under fire, through the sprawling supply depot processing centers, where Medicaid pallets are audited and diverted by edict to the sterile yet claustrophobic confines of Valkyrie. Medevac holds hurtling through contested airspace. Each location represents a choke point, where individual lives are weighed against the demands of the war machine, where risk and ritual accrue at each stage of the preservation chain. This framework compels us to examine a broader, more profound question. In a galaxy where entire agricultural worlds are systematically strip-mined to feed distant war efforts, where industrial planets choke on their own effluvium to produce munitions, what does individual preservation truly cost at planetary scale? How many agricultural worker hours? How many void ship deckhands? How many escort pilots who will not return home? We will follow Trooper Vex's journey through each institutional layer, while simultaneously mapping the resource chains that enable his continued breathing. His Vox Operator designation places him within specific preservation protocols that will determine whether his survival justifies the lives spent sustaining it. Numbers will accomplish what sermons cannot. Reveal that mercy, in the Imperium, is a budget line with teeth, a mathematical function that transforms distant suffering into immediate salvation. In the next chapter, we begin at the foundation of this pipeline, where crops and ore are converted through audit and hazard into the vials and instruments that purchase heartbeats on distant battlefields. The Imperium breathes through its supply lines, and every breath costs blood. Medicine begins not in the sterile confines of battlefield aid stations, but in the choking dust of agri-world terraces, where bonded laborers tend medicinal crops under the weight of impossible quotas. Each antiseptic vial, each surgical clamp, each combat stim represents a chain of human expenditure stretching across star systems, paid for in shifts worked, convoys lost, and lives consumed by the machinery of preservation. The antiseptic now flowing into Trooper Vex's abdominal wound began 18 months ago as grain alcohol distilled in the agricultural complexes of Groxis 7. Hereditary technicians maintained copper coils and prayer-etched condensers, while serfs worked 14-hour shifts processing fermented biomass through 17 stages of purification. Each batch required specialized labor: distillation supervisors, quality control adepts, packaging serfs, transport coordinators. The final product filled ceramic ampules stamped with purity seals, then moved into cargo containers destined for void ship holds that might never reach their destinations. Each combat stim sustaining the Vox operator's cardiovascular function represents 47 agricultural worker hours across multiple worlds. The base compounds originated in Medici herb plantations on distant agri-worlds where bonded laborers harvest psychoactive alkaloids under armed supervision. Processing requires 3 separate castes: botanical specialists maintaining genetic purity, chemical adepts extracting active compounds, and quality assessors testing potency on condemned prisoners. Stabilizing agents come from mineral extraction operations, where mining crews die at predictable rates extracting trace elements essential for pharmaceutical synthesis. The surgical clamps holding Trooper Vex's incision closed were forged in Metallica's secondary manufactorums by artisans whose grandfathers first learned to work sanctified steel. Each instrument demands precise metallurgy, ore smelting, alloy composition, thermal treatment, precision grinding, quality inspection, sanctification rituals. But clamps mean nothing without complete kits. Standard surgical issue consumes resources from 3 separate forge worlds: Metallica for clamps and retractors, Riser for cauterizers and battery cells, Lucius for monomolecular scalpels and sterile housings. Components cross the void, rendezvous at depot moons, then undergo assembly by indentured adepts who have never seen living patients, only specifications and quotas. The blood substitute coursing through improvised transfusion lines originated as biomatter synthesized from Catachan flora, where carnivorous plants and toxic atmospheres kill approximately 30% of harvesting teams annually. Surviving biomatter undergoes processing in orbital facilities staffed by tech adepts maintaining delicate bacterial cultures necessary for hemoglobin synthesis. Each batch requires constant monitoring, precise temperature control, and sterile conditions maintained by servitors whose human components were once medical specialists. These disparate components converged through void ship transport networks that consume lives with mechanical regularity. Supply convoy mortality rates average 23% for medical cargo runs, higher than standard munitions transport due to specialized storage requirements and priority targeting by enemy forces. Medical supplies require climate-controlled cargo holds, backup power systems, and escort vessels that draw fighter squadrons away from frontline support missions. The Departamento Munitorum maintains the classified Medicae Priority Protocol for emergency supply reallocation. This directive can redirect entire transport fleets mid-voyage when casualty projections exceed supply availability. Activation requires sector command approval and typically creates cascading resource shortages in lower priority theaters. One battlefield's medical emergency becomes another's supply drought. Our analysis reveals the complete resource pyramid supporting battlefield medical intervention. To treat one casualty like Trooper Vex requires a supply chain employing approximately 2,340 workers across 17 worlds. Agricultural laborers, mineral extractors, manufacturing specialists, transport crews, quality control personnel, administrative coordinators, security forces, and maintenance technicians. Each represents specialized training, equipment allocation, housing provision, caloric intake, and replacement costs when workplace hazards claim lives. The Vox operator's pulse becomes an economic equation written in distant lives. His heartbeat represents grain alcohol, distilled by serfs who will never see battlefields, surgical instruments forged by artisans whose children died in manufactorum accidents, blood substitute synthesized from biomatter harvested by teams facing daily death. When Trooper Vex breathes, thousands breathe with him through the labor that sustains his life. Forms decide who bleeds and when. At the edge of the Medicae station, a Munitorum cloak unfurls Rescue Authorization 922R, fiber parchment scored with red hazard lines and spaces for 3 seals. Each signature represents a calculated risk assessment, translated into bureaucratic language that transforms individual agony into institutional decision points. Signature 1 belongs to the field commander. Medicae Primus certification of clinical viability versus minutes to exsanguination. The officer weighs tactical multiplication factors. Does this casualty's continued service justify diverting close air support from ongoing operations? Signature 2 comes from the Battalion Logistics Prefect. Airframe availability versus projected escort losses. Fuel reserves, maintenance schedules, and replacement costs undergo rapid calculation. Without both seals, armored medevac remains grounded. Signature 3 belongs to the Commissariat Witness, doctrinal necessity versus moral risk. This final authorization determines whether rescue operations serve broader Imperial interests or merely indulge unauthorized sentiment. The form carries a time window. If the third seal dries after expiration, permission lapses, and the wounded become ledger entries. Commissars enforce the doctrine of tactical necessity with ritual clarity. Unauthorized heroics, 2 troopers sprinting back for a friend without orders, translates to insubordination with material risk, punishable by immediate execution. Yet the same office can sanctify sacrifice when it advances narrative utility. Orders are cut for sanctified perimeters, so that standard bearers or specialists may be lifted under picked capture for later propaganda distribution. Approved suffering becomes recruitment material. Unapproved compassion becomes cautionary example. The hierarchy of medical priority is engraved into Medicae catechisms. Officers with command codes, then specialists, then standard bearers, then line troopers by proximity and projected usefulness. Each rung carries thresholds: minimum survival probability, maximum resource draw, acceptable escort casualties. The phrase "permission to bleed" is literal. Authorization for perimeter squads to spend lives establishing extraction corridors. Trooper Vex's chart moves favorably along this hierarchy. His designation, Vox Operator, Company Net, adds institutional multiplication. 1 stabilized communications specialist equals intact coordination for 3 platoons. The logistics prefect calculates escort costs accordingly, while the Medicae Primus initials stim allotments normally reserved for junior officers. The Commissariat Witness delays, rephrasing the request so today's extraction can be reported as continuity of command preservation. Above these standard levers sits an override few will ever hear, the encrypted transmission designated Canticle Delta. This litany signifies Asset Primaris Presence, Astartes, High Command, or Sacred Relic, and collapses the three-seal ritual into single authorization. When Canticle Delta sounds, aircraft divert, convoys bend course, and casualty categories rewrite themselves mid-ink. Everyone nearby becomes expendable perimeter, whether they consent or not. Control mechanisms operate through dual systems, explicit regulation, and opportunistic narrative construction. The paperwork sets ratios, clocks, and resource ceilings. The performance manufactures meaning from sanctioned pain, with field scribes following commissars to harvest phrases, while servo skulls angle toward approved dying. The Medica Theatre becomes a stage with quotas, where individual survival serves institutional storytelling. This rigid lattice prevents waste, while ensuring mercy never outpaces doctrine. Yet where forms forbid movement and litanies never arrive, another economy emerges. Ration chits slipped across palms, contraband traded for navigation errors, favors called over cracked Vox channels. When permission is priced beyond reach, soldiers purchase it anyway. Evacuation is a market disguised as mercy. Where official channels choke on their own bureaucracy, shadow economies emerge, powered by desperation and the arithmetic of scarcity. Every rescue spawns transactions where survival becomes currency, and compassion carries interest rates calculated in favors, contraband, and blood. Stretcher-bearers maintain private ledgers scratched into ammunition crate lids, recording exchange rates that fluctuate with proximity to enemy fire. Standard protocol assigns casualties by grid coordinates and medical priority, but ration chits purchase expedited placement. A week's caffeine allocation moves a wounded trooper from the third evacuation run to the first. Protein paste buys 10 meters of safer route selection. Water purification tablets can upgrade transport from foot carry through sniper alleys to motorized evacuation along covered approaches. The bearers learn to read wounds as prices, calculating risk against reward with the precision of Munitorum quartermasters. Valkyrie pilots operate similar calculations from cockpits high above the killing ground. Official flight paths follow approved corridors mapped by distant command, but navigation errors can be purchased through careful negotiation. Instrument difficulties develop suddenly when the right incentives change hands. Elsho sticks, Amasec diverted from commissariat stores, stim doses skimmed from medical supplies, even captured enemy equipment with black market value. Each deviation leaves shadows, other units that won't see air support until darkness falls. Inside the Medici station, Orderly Thex maintains dual accounting systems with practiced efficiency. Her official records track supplies dispensed according to Departamento Munitorum protocols, antiseptic allocated by wound severity, stims distributed by priority classification. Her personal tally, carved into her equipment case's underside, records different mathematics: lives traded for medical material, supplies diverted for unauthorized treatment, casualties upgraded through informal negotiation rather than bureaucratic authorization. Trooper Vex's evacuation reveals the system's brutal exchange rates through the penal legion detail assembled for perimeter security. 17 condemned men drawn from military prisons, their death sentences commuted to immediate expendability in exchange for theoretical redemption. Sergeant Corvin, a 20-year veteran reduced to penal status through accumulated infractions, understands the arithmetic perfectly. His detail will advance into suspected kill zones, draw enemy fire to reveal positions, then hold ground while extraction proceeds behind their corpses. The resource mathematics are stark and unforgiving. Saving one Vox operator requires sacrificing an average of 1.3 penal troopers for covering fire operations, a statistical abstraction representing the probability that condemned men will die, creating tactical conditions necessary for successful evacuation. Additional casualties accrue throughout the medical supply chain. Convoy escorts killed defending transport vehicles, void ship crew lost during emergency resupply operations, dock workers crushed by shifting cargo pallets. Many soldiers carry small parchments inscribed Candela Pro Ferro, candle for the lighthouse, tucked into helmet bands or sewn into uniform linings. These talismans represent desperate theology, individual sacrifice, illuminating larger purpose, personal extinction, justified through institutional survival. The phrase becomes ritualized protection during rescue operations, whispered by stretcher bearers and pilots as they navigate between official duty and mercenary calculation. The grey economy transforms institutional brutality into personal transaction, allowing individuals to purchase outcomes the official system denies them. Yet this marketplace operates within the same fundamental logic governing all imperial resource allocation. Lives are currency, mercy is commodity, and survival is always purchased through systematic expenditure of others. The only difference lies in who collects the interest and how the debts are recorded in ledgers that will never face audit. Imperial medical doctrine is rooted in theology, not compassion. Faith calibrates every decision in the medici station, transforming individual suffering into institutional sacrament. Chaplains preach that preserving life serves the emperor only when the preserved can multiply his glory through continued service. Their catechism is functional, not tender. Save the voice that commands batteries, the hand that holds the banner, the mind that keeps the codes. Chaplain Voss moves between the wounded with practiced efficiency, his Crozius Arcanum marking charts with benedictions that carry medical weight. His sermons echo through the Medicae station as doctrine made manifest. The body is the emperor's temple, but some temples house greater congregations. Guard Medicae learn the litanies of useful continuance, blessing for the rebreather, prayer for the cauterizer, absolution for the denied. Their manuals list priority as doctrine, officers, specialists, standard bearers, then line troopers by proximity and projected institutional return. For the Adeptus Astartes, the calculus acquires colder purity. The apothecarian recites the oath of retrieval, an article of faith with surgical edges. From the flesh, the seed. From the seed, the chapter. From the chapter, the emperor's will. Within that oath, individual survival becomes secondary to genetic perpetuation. Brother Apothecary Lycan demonstrates this principle with clinical precision in a shattered conduit hall. 2 space marines lie before him. Brother Kalen wounded but breathing, his chest caved by demonic impact, and Brother Varus newly fallen, his helmet cracked, but gene seed intact. Lycan's Narthecium hums as he passes the living to reach the dead. Ceramite parts under sanctified blade, servo clamps hold extraction drill whispers, paired progenoid glands slide into vile ampules that seal with prayer and finality. The timing is critical. Biologic degradation accelerates after death, viability declining steeply at 17 minutes. Kalen watches with pain-widened eyes as his apothecary secures the precious genetic material, understanding the calculation perfectly. The living Marine's gene seed remains immature. His survival probability contests against time and fire. The corpse's genetic legacy faces a narrowing window. Institutional preservation trumps personal survival. This reveals the doctrine of substitution governing all Imperial preservation. The life worth saving is the one that perpetuates the institution. Individual death achieves meaning through institutional life, personal extinction, justified by systematic continuation. Soldiers die so regiments survive. Regiments die so the Guard endures. The Guard bleeds so the Imperium persists. Trooper Vex embodies this principle through his communications expertise. His survival represents tactical multiplication, one preserved Vox operator coordinates. Artillery strikes maintains company coherence, prevents collapses that consume entire formations. The Medicae officer's enhanced treatment protocols reflect this calculation. Stim doses normally reserved for officers, priority evacuation status, surgical intervention justified through institutional mathematics rather than human sympathy. Chaplain Voss administers last rites to casualties marked for black classification, while simultaneously blessing medical supplies, sustaining higher priority wounded. His prayers invoke the Emperor's mercy for those who will die, and his wisdom for those whose survival serves larger purposes. The ritual creates meaning from mathematical brutality, transforming resource allocation into divine will. The whispered phrase returns. One candle for a lighthouse. A klaxon pierces the Medicae station's controlled chaos. 9 notes, encrypted, unmistakable. Canticle Delta. Asset Primaris designation, transmitted nearby. Protocols convulse instantly. Airframes retasked, corridors redrawn, priority codes rewritten mid-ink. Commissars reach for emergency seals. Medicae reach for new authorization forms. Pilots recalculate fuel loads against flak corridors. Trooper Vex's enhanced medical status suddenly competes against protocols that commandeer entire evacuation operations. The doctrine of substitution will face its ultimate test. In the next minutes, theology will meet logistics at muzzle height, and institutional priorities will collide with the raw mathematics of who lives and who provides the currency for that survival. The Manufactorum's skeleton breathes smoke through punctured arterial systems. Sergeant Harrick leads his section through corridors where industrial decay meets systematic violence, their movements calculated against ammunition expenditure and extraction timelines. Emergency lumens flicker against walls, scarred by decades of production quotas and recent lass fire, casting shadows that shift with each distant explosion. The air carries the metallic signature of machine oil, cordite, and the copper taste of blood converted into tactical data. Trooper Vex waits 200 meters ahead in a Medicae station carved from assembly line infrastructure. His stretcher rests on conveyor systems, repurposed as surgical platforms, Vox units still crackling with coordinate traffic that justifies his enhanced medical priority. The extraction route threads through chemical processing areas where toxic runoff bubbles in containment vats, past barricades constructed from HAB unit doors and industrial equipment. Harrick calculates timing against resource expenditure. 12 minutes to casualty collection, 8 for evacuation procedures, then withdrawal through corridors growing more dangerous with each tactical minute consumed. The Voxnet convulses with encrypted priority transmission. 9 notes slice through tactical chatter like a scalpel through flesh. Canticle Delta. Asset Primaris designation. 2 corridors, east. Every protocol rewrites itself instantly. Harrick's section freezes as new orders crackle through headsets. Redirect to provide covering fire for Apothecarian operations. The wounded Vox operator's evacuation becomes secondary objective within a hierarchy that extends beyond individual survival mathematics. Brother Apothecary Lycan materializes through industrial haze, like imperial iconography given flesh, his white armor pristine against the Manufactorum's corroded infrastructure. Servo skulls orbit his advance, Auspex arrays scanning for life signs through debris and flame with mechanical precision. His Narthecium gleams with sanctified steel calibrated for genetic preservation rather than individual salvation. The apothecary moves with institutional purpose that transcends human urgency. He serves genetic continuity itself. Command Vox redistributes tactical assets with bureaucratic efficiency. Harrick's section establishes perimeter security, while Apothecarian operations proceed according to classified protocols. Enemy contacts multiply on Auspex displays as heretic forces flood through maintenance infrastructure, drawn by Imperial activity like scavengers detecting weakness. The corridor becomes a resource funnel where preservation costs will be calculated in ammunition expenditure and acceptable casualties. 17 penal troopers emerge from shadows, driven forward by shockmall enforcement and commissaria supervision. Their sentences: cowardice, black market trafficking, unauthorized compassion, have been commuted to immediate expendability in exchange for theoretical redemption. They advance into established kill zones with grim professionalism, understanding their function as ablative screening, measured in heartbeats and tactical delay. Promethium ignites in cascading chemical reactions as enemy fire finds fuel distribution systems. Liquid flame pours from overhead infrastructure, pooling where it burns with industrial intensity that transforms breathable atmosphere into superheated toxicity. Ceiling sections collapse under thermal stress, raining twisted metal and sparking electrical conduits. The corridor becomes a controlled demolition where visibility drops to arm's length, and survival requires constant recalculation of risk versus movement. Stretcher-bearers reach Trooper Vex through systematic chaos, lifting him with practiced efficiency, despite sniper fire raking their position. Trooper Gannis absorbs a round through the throat, arterial spray painting stretcher canvas before he collapses. Trooper Mech slides into position without hesitation, grasping blood-slick handles as las bolts whine overhead. The Vox operator remains conscious, witnessing institutional mathematics through morphine-hazed vision. The Valkyrie pilot calls for extraction smoke through Vox static. Purple canisters detonate in sequence, filling corridors with dense chemical fog that burns respiratory systems while masking thermal signatures. Through this artificial twilight, Apothecary Lycan reaches his target, a Space Marine sergeant whose power armor bears demonic breach marks, vital signs failing, but gene seed intact within acceptable parameters. Lycan performs the ritual of extraction with surgical precision, while guardsmen die maintaining tactical perimeter. His Narthecium parts ceramite with blessed efficiency. Servo clamps hold tissue, while extraction protocols whisper through bone and sinew. Paired progenoid glands slide into vile ampules that seal with prayer and institutional finality. The Marine's body remains where genetics no longer justify resource allocation. Trooper Vex witnesses this tableau through chemical haze, the white-armored figure withdrawing with sealed genetic material, while men die around him for different institutional mathematics. The extraction succeeds through systematic expenditure. 11 guardsmen terminated, 14 penal troopers expended, 1 Vox operator preserved, 1 gene seed secured. The corridor fills with corpses as aircraft lift into smoke-filled skies, carrying assets that justify all previous calculations. Paper transforms blood into policy. 3 hours after extraction, Departmental Munitorum scribes convert the corridor's chaos into standardized documentation that will outlive every witness. Form LX-R19 Delta bears the bureaucratic seals that transform individual death into institutional mathematics, each casualty classified according to resource allocation protocols designed in distant offices by clerks who have never heard gunfire. The official casualty assessment reads with clinical precision. 11 Imperial Guardsmen terminated during tactical operations. 1 specialist communications asset stabilized and evacuated. 1 Adeptus Astartes deceased with genetic material successfully recovered under Canticle Delta authorization. The Penal Legion detail receives no numerical acknowledgement. 17 condemned men expended as ablative screening exist only in administrative shadow, their deaths categorized as resource expenditure rather than human loss. Munitorum Assessment Classification. Mission successful. Critical assets preserved. This designation triggers automatic resource reallocation, authorizing replacement personnel and equipment resupply for participating units. Success measures institutional continuity rather than casualty minimization, calculating victory through preserved multiplication factors rather than individual survival rates. The mathematical framework underlying these classifications reveals the Imperium's preservation priorities through stark arithmetic. Classified Munitorum directives authorize up to 15 guard casualties per successful Astartes gene seed recovery, reflecting genetic material's irreplaceable value in maintaining chapter strength across millennia. Specialist communications personnel carry authorization thresholds of 5 guard casualties maximum, justified through tactical multiplication factors that amplify individual capability into formation-level coordination. Line troopers receive 0 authorized casualty expenditure for individual preservation unless incorporated into approved mass action protocols, where aggregate morale becomes the purchased commodity. Trooper Vex's evacuation receives retroactive justification through tactical narrative value classification. His continued communications coordination enables company-level tactical coherence, preventing formation collapse that would consume additional resources through emergency reinforcement operations. The bureaucratic language transforms his survival into propaganda asset. Picked captures of his evacuation will circulate as recruitment material, generating replacement volunteers through carefully crafted narrative multiplication. This answers our first planted question about the rumored Munitorum ratios. The mathematical thresholds operate through institutional multiplication factors, not individual human worth. Each preserved life must generate returns exceeding preservation costs, measured in tactical capability, coordination efficiency, or symbolic value. The arithmetic weighs projected institutional benefit against immediate resource expenditure, reducing personal suffering to budgetary considerations with mechanical precision. In her Medicaid ledger, Orderly Thex reconciles dual accounting systems. Official records track supplies dispensed per protocol. Her personal tally, carved into equipment case undersides, records different mathematics. Stim doses traded for dying perimeter guards who never lived to collect. She folds the scratched metal under medical supplies and extinguishes a votive candle marked Candela Pro Pharaoh. The smoke rises through ventilation grates like prayers converted into atmospheric recycling. Yet this framework compels examination of a more disturbing question. If this arithmetic scales throughout the Imperium, if every preservation decision operates through multiplication factors that justify expenditure through institutional return, what ultimate one sits at the apex of this vast calculation? What singular preservation justifies the systematic consumption of everyone else? The mathematics continue grinding forward, accumulating individual sacrifice toward an end point that transforms entire star systems into currency for preservation beyond imagination. Institutions devour populations to achieve immortality. In the Imperium's vast military apparatus, regiments exist as administrative entities that transcend the mortality of their human components, legal constructs requiring constant feeding through systematic demographic consumption. The 47th Mordian Iron Guard maintains its designation, battle honors, and organizational structure, regardless of how many times its personnel are completely replaced through casualties and recruitment cycles. The mathematics of institutional preservation operate with mechanical precision. When battle reduces the 47th Mordian from its authorized strength of 4,000 personnel to 400 survivors scattered across Medicaid stations and casualty collection points, the Departamento Monitorum activates replenishment protocols that strip entire Hive blocks of military-age populations. Conscription teams sweep through residential sectors with quotas calculated not by voluntary enlistment, but by administrative necessity. The regiment requires bodies to fill organizational charts regardless of individual aptitude or survival probability. Sergeant Voss has witnessed 3 complete regimental rebirths across 18 years of service, his parade sash patched with fabric older than the last 2 cohorts combined. He maintains the regimental shrine with practiced efficiency, lighting votive candles for each new arrival, while tallying the dead in ledgers that chronicle institutional continuity through human expenditure. The bitter irony weighs heavily. Preserving the regiment's administrative existence consumes exponentially more human life than the original formation ever contained. Yet the 47th Mordian persists as bureaucratic entity, while its constituent elements cycle through recruitment, training, deployment, and replacement with mechanical regularity. Each rebirth operates through systematic demographic consumption across multiple star systems. Agricultural worlds surrender their youth to imperial service, accepting population decline as tithe obligation. Training facilities process replacement personnel through abbreviated programs. The original 47th Mordian required 18 months of formation training, while current replacements receive 6 weeks of basic instruction before deployment to active theaters. Quality degrades with each iteration, but institutional continuity remains paramount over individual competency or survival rates. Our analysis of Monitorum resource allocation data reveals the true scale of institutional preservation costs. Maintaining one Imperial Guard regiment's continuous existence over a decade requires the complete demographic output of 12 agricultural worlds of average productivity. This calculation encompasses not merely frontline casualties, but the entire support structure. Battle losses averaging 60–70% annually in active theaters, training attrition during abbreviated instruction cycles, transport casualties during void ship deployment, disease outbreaks in overcrowded transit holds, escort vessel losses protecting troop convoys, and manufacturing casualties producing uniforms, weapons, and equipment for each replacement cycle. Total personnel. Consumption, base. Strength X annual attrition, rate X operational, years X support multiplier, total personnel, consumption. Duck base, strength X annual attrition, rate X operational, years X support multiplier, 4,000 Ken. Titan 6 of Ampen 10 at 2.3 stars and 59,800 personnel over decade, 4,000 Kalpont, 10 times 7 Tenkton Stu, K 59,100 personnel over decade. This figure excludes the broader infrastructure costs, induction priests, drill cadres, medici screening personnel, commissarial oversight, transport crews, logistics specialists, and administrative staff necessary to sustain recruitment operations across multiple star systems. The regiment lives by continually digesting populations that will never see the banner they replenish. At the regimental shrine, candles accumulate on iron racks with each reinforcement draft, wax welding to wax, until the display resembles industrial slag. Candela Pro Ferro is etched into the brass lintel, individual flames feeding the institutional lighthouse. New arrivals light wicks with trembling hands, each flame representing both memorial and levy receipt. The phrase achieves its full meaning at formation level. Countless individual candles consumed to maintain the lighthouse that guides Imperial operations across entire sectors. Trooper Vex appears in the latest muster roll as Return to Strength, Communications, his survival increasing paper readiness while preserving continuity symbols. The same voice on the company net maintains the illusion of unbroken lineage, his extraction footage circulating as recruitment material in the next tithe appeal. Individual preservation serves institutional multiplication, personal survival justified through administrative necessity rather than human compassion. The conscription apparatus operates with relentless efficiency, converting entire communities into military components through standardized processing. Families receive notification. Imperial service obligation. Report for processing. Transport containers marked with regimental insignia carry replacements who have never seen the colors they will die defending, assigned tactical roles based on physical assessment rather than personal preference or capability. Sergeant Voss folds the parade sash and observes replacement troops with professional detachment, calculating survival probabilities based on training deficiencies that characterize each successive rebirth. The newest conscripts carry lasguns manufactured to reduced specifications, wear flak armor assembled from recycled materials, and receive tactical instruction that prioritizes administrative compliance over battlefield effectiveness. Yet they bear the same regimental insignia, march under the same colors, and serve the same institutional entity that has consumed thousands before them through systematic replacement protocols. The regiment persists as administrative immortality purchased through demographic mortality, individual death-feeding institutional life through recruitment systems that transform entire populations into military components. But when battle grows scarce, other mechanisms maintain the necessary attrition rates. Disease supplies what the enemy cannot, and purity protocols demand their own mathematics of preservation through systematic elimination. Disease transforms the Imperium's medical apparatus from preservation instrument into surgical blade. When biological contamination threatens Imperial formations, doctrine abandons individual treatment for institutional amputation, wielding mathematics like scalpels to excise infected components before corruption spreads through the vast body politic. Contagion becomes siegecraft, not enemy action, but internal rebellion requiring immediate, brutal suppression. Medici Primus Caini calculates contamination vectors with geometric precision at Forward Aid Station Tertius, where plague symptoms manifest among wounded guardsmen through fever spikes, respiratory distress, and subcutaneous hemorrhaging, suggesting viral transmission with exponential multiplication potential. Her actuarial tables reduce human suffering to statistical probability, projecting infection spread through atmospheric sampling and biometric analysis conducted by servo skulls equipped with biological sensors. The mathematics are pitiless. 200 infected casualties could contaminate 2,000 healthy personnel within 48 hours through standard medical processing protocols. Quarantine circles are painted in yellow across the aid station's ferrocrete floor, their radii determined not by compassion, but by infection vector calculations that treat human breath as ammunition and proximity as tactical error. Medical personnel don sealed breathing apparatus, while Adeptus Mechanicus bioaugurs project casualty rates through complex algorithms that weigh individual survival against systematic preservation. Resources flow toward containment rather than treatment, sterilization chemicals, incineration fuel, replacement personnel for medical staff who will face exposure during elimination procedures. When contamination threatens containment breach, Medici Primus Caini activates terminal sanitation procedures under Munitorum Authorization 7 Delta. The infected medical tent receives promethium dispersal through automated systems, sacrificing 200 wounded to prevent systematic contamination of the entire medical complex. Servo skulls record final vital signs for administrative documentation, while chemical flames consume biological vectors with industrial thoroughness. The ledger reads, 200 sacrificed, 2,000 preserved. Imperial doctrine names this mercy. Exterminatus operates at cellular level through sterilization protocols that mirror planetary cleansing, systematic elimination of corrupted components to preserve doctrinal purity. Chemical mists roll through corridors, while rad purge lamps incinerate microbes and epithelium simultaneously. The logic remains constant. Kill vectors, not patients, unless the fastest vector is the patient himself. Trooper Vex undergoes mandatory decontamination, despite showing no infection symptoms. His evacuation from contested zones requiring purification protocols that eliminate potential contamination through systematic exposure to sterilization procedures. The chemical bath burns exposed skin, while respiratory filters strain toxic vapors, but survival calculations indicate 15% patient mortality represents acceptable losses when weighed against potential epidemic spread. His communications expertise justifies the resource expenditure, while line troopers receive summary incineration rather than decontamination allocation. Acceptable mortality rate. Contamination, prevention, value decontamination, cost x institutional priority factor. Acceptable mortality, rate, decontamination, cost contamination, prevention, value, x institutional priority factor. He survives the procedure through statistical fortune and tactical necessity. In the decontamination chamber's corner, a votive candle gutters beneath a cracked shrine plate inscribed Candela Pro Ferro. Individual flame consumed to maintain institutional light, personal extinction justified through collective preservation. The Medicae snuffs it with chemical-burned fingers, then lights another from a supply that never diminishes. Biological preservation serves institutional preservation through mathematical precision that reduces human life to epidemiological variables. Keeping the Imperium's body healthy requires systematic amputation of infected components, with medical personnel serving as surgical instruments rather than healing agents. The arithmetic extends beyond biological contamination to encompass ideological purity, genetic integrity, and ultimately the preservation of living symbols that justify all previous sacrifice through carefully curated survival narratives. The Imperium manufactures its own miracles through systematic curation of survival narratives in vast propaganda mills scattered across administrative worlds. Picked adepts transform individual preservation into institutional mythology, crafting recruitment materials from carefully edited footage that converts genuine suffering into inspiring spectacle. Some lives are engineered to survive, not because their owners matter, but because their continued breathing serves as living advertisements for imperial service, their existence more valuable than entire formations when properly marketed to populations ripe for conscription. Picked crews embedded with Imperial Guard formations operate under classified protocols that prioritize symbolic preservation over documentary accuracy. Servo-skull editors excise footage of standard bearers falling, splice in triumphant withdrawals, and overlay hymns calibrated to maximize recruitment response. The machinery that keeps these figures breathing runs on the same fuel as every other Imperial engine, systematic expenditure of others. When standard bearers sustain wounds, medical teams receive explicit orders to prioritize their survival over multiple line casualties, understanding that propaganda value multiplies exponentially when iconic figures survive dramatic circumstances under apparent divine protection. Ecclesiarch documentation reduces spectacle to precise policy through classified formulas that treat inspiration as quantifiable resource. The mathematical framework is explicit. Accept up to 1,000 peripheral casualties if the icon can be shown surviving dramatic combat through 3 documented stages: wound, peril, deliverance. Peripheral casualties include stretcher bearers, flank squads, supply handlers, and any civilian within blast radius. The goal is emphasis rather than deception. Truth is edited, not fabricated. Lists of approved survival tropes circulate with communion wafers: banner never falling, officer shielding child, vox operator calling fire while blood foams at lips. Living saints represent the apex of manufactured survival. Their miraculous preservation orchestrated through classified protection protocols that sacrifice entire formations to maintain symbolic invincibility. Sister Celestine's survival during the 13th Black Crusade required redirecting 3 guard regiments as expendable screening, their deaths providing tactical conditions necessary for her dramatic escape footage. The resource allocation operates through institutional mathematics that treat individual saints as strategic assets worth unlimited expenditure of conventional forces. Trooper Vex has achieved icon status through institutional alchemy that transforms his evacuation into recruitment gold. His survival footage circulates through Imperial propaganda networks under the designation "The Voice That Would Not Fall," edited to emphasize his communications coordination while minimizing the 11 guardsmen who died creating extraction conditions. Adeptus Ministorum scribes craft his story into catechisms adapted for different audiences. His steadfast voice coordinating artillery strikes becomes proof of the Emperor's protection for the faithful, his survival evidence that duty brings divine reward. The process operates through narrative multiplication. One preserved life, properly marketed, generates exponentially more replacement volunteers through systematic propaganda distribution. Our analysis of recruitment data reveals concrete returns. Vex's evacuation footage appears in conscription materials across 17 sectors, generating 4,147 new volunteers within 8 months of initial distribution. The institutional return on preservation investment calculates as follows. Recruitment, multiplier, generated volunteers. Preservation cost in lives, 4,84725 Wastasminon 939. Recruitment multiplier. Preservation cost in lives, generated volunteers. NAS 25, 4,047, 193.9. This represents exceptional efficiency in human resource conversion, with each life spent preserving the icon yielding nearly 200 replacement personnel through inspirational multiplication. The mathematics justify continued investment in icon maintenance systems that monitor living symbols for health degradation, ideological drift, or narrative obsolescence. Icon maintenance divisions operate with clinical precision across multiple administrative levels, tracking propaganda assets through medical monitoring that exceeds their tactical value. When icons age beyond usefulness, replacement protocols activate. Younger figures receive enhanced protection, while older symbols face heroic missions, ensuring their deaths occur under properly documented circumstances. The institutional machinery consumes its own advertisements when market effectiveness declines, converting expired icons into martyrdom narratives that inspire the next generation of symbols. Behind the propaganda apparatus persists the same brutal cost structure governing all imperial preservation. Each icon represents a lamp fed by tallow rendered from anonymous crowds, their manufactured miracles purchased through systematic expenditure of thousands whose names never appear in recruitment materials. Medici teams maintain Vex's visible scarring to enhance rather than diminish propaganda appeal, his communications duties now including recorded messages for training facilities, where his survival story convinces young men to seek similar glory. The Candela Pro Pharaoh mystery achieves complete resolution through this systematic icon cultivation. The lighthouse represents living symbols whose preserved existence guides entire populations toward willing sacrifice, standard bearers whose colors never fall, saints whose survival proves divine favor, heroes whose resurrections demonstrate imperial invincibility. Individual candles burn themselves out, feeding the institutional beacon that maintains recruitment through manufactured inspiration. The catechism is literal. Preserve the visible lighthouse, and the fleet will continue navigating toward sacrifice. At regimental shrines, votive candles accumulate with each new conscription wave, wax welding to wax, until displays resemble industrial slag. Fresh arrivals light flames while watching picked captures of Trooper Vex's evacuation, each recruit believing they too might achieve iconic status through faithful service. The candles multiply as replacements arrive, each flame representing both memorial for the consumed and beacon for the next levy. Individual preservation serves institutional consumption through carefully orchestrated survival narratives that convince populations their sacrifice serves higher purpose. Yet even icons serve larger preservation mathematics, their symbolic value justified only when it feeds an ultimate lighthouse whose continued existence requires not thousands, but millions of candles daily. The arithmetic continues grinding upward through every level of imperial hierarchy, accumulating individual sacrifice toward an end point that transforms entire star systems into currency for preservation beyond imagination. In the next chapter, we discover what singular entity sits at the apex of this vast calculation, whose continued life justifies the systematic consumption of everyone else. Beneath Terra's polluted surface, in chambers older than the Imperium itself, the ultimate mathematics of preservation operate with mechanical precision. The Golden Throne is not merely a seat, but an engine built from cathedrals, a continent of copper nerves and ossified gold wired into a dying god whose continued existence requires daily tribute measured in souls. 1,000 psychers burn each dawn to sustain the Emperor's corpse life and power, the Astronomican beacon that holds imperial civilization together across galactic distances. The resource pyramid supporting this singular preservation dwarfs every previous calculation. Black ships harvest psychically gifted humans from the populations that surrender their children as tithe obligation, understanding that mutation represents both blessing and death sentence. The Scholastica Psychana processes these souls through conditioning regimens designed not for survival, but optimal consumption, psychological preparation that maximizes psychic output during terminal feeding, spiritual training that transforms individual extinction into sacramental offering. Our analysis reveals the complete cost structure underlying imperial preservation. The Emperor's continued life requires approximately 365,000 direct sacrifices annually, plus an estimated 2.8 million support casualties across the harvesting infrastructure. Black ship crews, processing facility staff, escort squadrons, and administrative personnel. Navigation failures when beacon strength fluctuates add another 1.2 million casualties annually across stranded fleets and failed warp translations. The total approaches 4.4 million souls, consumed yearly to maintain one dying deity's preservation. Annual imperial cost, direct sacrifice. Infrastructure, losses plus scarsa navigation casualties. Annual imperial cost, direct sacrifice. Infrastructure, losses plus navigation casualties, 365,000 plus, 800,000, 200,000. 365,000 souls annually, 365,000 per 2,800,000 persons, 200,000 for 365,000 souls annually. This calculation excludes broader demographic costs, entire worlds organized around psyker breeding programs, forge worlds producing harvesting machinery, void ship construction for black ship fleets, and military forces protecting collection operations. The complete resource allocation requires demographic output from thousands of imperial worlds whose populations exist primarily to feed this preservation engine. Every previous calculation, Trooper Vex's evacuation, regimental continuity, gene seed recovery, icon maintenance, serves this ultimate equation. Soldiers die to save specialists whose expertise maintains tactical coordination. Specialists preserve formations that protect supply lines. Supply lines feed the war machine that secures Imperial space. Imperial space enables psyker collection across galactic distances. Collected psykers burn to sustain the beacon that guides Imperial fleets, maintains interstellar communication, and prevents civilizational collapse into isolated fragments that chaos would consume systematically. The Candela Profaro mystery achieves complete resolution through this cosmic preservation project. Every individual sacrifice represents a single candle whose flame feeds the ultimate lighthouse, the Emperor's psychic beacon illuminating Imperial space. The catechism is literal. Preserve the visible lighthouse through systematic candle consumption, and the fleet will continue navigating toward willing sacrifice. Individual preservation serves institutional multiplication scaled to species survival, personal extinction justified through galactic illumination that prevents humanity's complete annihilation. Trooper Vex's survival, properly contextualized, represents a microscopic component in calculations that extend across millennia and star systems. His communications expertise reduces casualty rates that preserve populations for eventual harvesting. His icon status generates recruitment, maintaining military strength that protects collection operations. His evacuation demonstrates Imperial preservation commitment, encouraging populations to surrender gifted children willingly rather than concealing them from black ship tithes. The Imperium's entire structure, its bureaucracy, military, faith, and systematic consumption of its own people, exists as life support for one corpse god, whose preservation justifies unlimited expenditure of everyone else. There is no mathematical ceiling when the preserved entity represents the state's foundational deity, the linchpin preventing existential dissolution. The arithmetic becomes infinite because alternatives include species extinction rather than political defeat. At Terra's heart, machinery converts human souls into navigational light, while scribes update consumption quotas with bureaucratic efficiency. The Golden Throne operates through identical mathematics governing battlefield aid stations. Lives are currency. Preservation is commodity. Survival is purchased through systematic expenditure of others. Only scale differs, not hundreds but millions, not tactical advantage but species continuity, not individual multiplication, but galactic beacon maintenance requiring demographic consumption that will never cease while humanity persists among the stars. Steam bleeds from cracked pipework above the administrative processing station, where Trooper Vex signs medical discharge papers, with trembling fingers still bearing chemical burns from decontamination protocols. The lasburn scar across his abdomen pulls tight as he leans forward, ink pooling at the quill's tip before trailing across parchment marked with Imperial seals and medical clearance codes. His Vox unit rests beside the forms, cables coiled and ready, its presence transforming bureaucratic recovery into tactical asset restoration. A Munitorum clerk examines documentation with mechanical precision, then applies the stamp that converts medical patient into military resource. Fit for service, reassignment authorized. The brass seal bites parchment with institutional finality, marking Vex's return to operational utility. He will join Composite Regiment 47 Delta, assembled from survivors of multiple decimated formations. His communications expertise adding capability to paper-strength calculations, while his survival narrative continues generating recruitment through propaganda multiplication across 17 sectors. Medical orderly Thex closes her official ledger and opens the personal tally carved beneath her equipment case. Standard columns document antiseptic allocation, stim distribution, and successful treatment outcomes according to Departamento Munitorum protocols. Her hidden arithmetic records different mathematics, 25 lives spent preserving one Vox operator through evacuation procedures, decontamination protocols, and medical intervention. The calculation balances through institutional logic. One preserved specialist coordinates 3 companies, tactical multiplication justifying resource expenditure through projected force effectiveness that will consume additional populations through enhanced operational capability. Brother Apothecary Lycan seals paired progenoid vials for transport to chapter recruitment worlds, pressing purity wax until sacred sigils cool into permanent authentication. The genetic material extracted during corridor operations represents continuity purchased through systematic guard expenditure, institutional preservation achieved through individual consumption. His servo skulls catalog the sealed containers according to classified protocols that treat human genetics as strategic resources requiring protection exceeding entire regimental formations. Memorial candles multiply on iron racks throughout the aid station shrine, wax pooling and hardening until the display resembles industrial slag. Each flame represents both memorial for the consumed and beacon for the next levy, smoke rising through ventilation grates stained with accumulated soot from prayers converted into atmospheric recycling. Candela Pro Ferro remains etched in brass above the shrine. Individual flames feeding institutional light, personal extinction justified through collective illumination that guides populations toward willing sacrifice. The mathematics achieve final comprehension through this convergence of documentation, genetics, and ritual. To keep one alive, many died. 4.7 direct casualties per battlefield preservation, stretcher-bearers facing 23% convoy mortality rates, decontamination procedures consuming 15% of patients to prevent systemic contamination. To keep institutions alive, more will die, regiments requiring demographic output from 12 agricultural worlds per decade, chapters harvesting gene seed through authorized casualty expenditure ratios, propaganda systems, manufacturing icons from preserved survivors whose narratives generate replacement volunteers. To keep the Emperor's light burning, all may be consumed. The ultimate preservation mathematics operate without ceiling. 365,000 Wainestas psychers sacrificed annually, plus 4.4 million support casualties across harvesting infrastructure. Entire star systems converted into currency for beacon maintenance that prevents civilizational collapse into isolated fragments. Trooper Vex represents microscopic success within calculations extending across millennia, his preserved breath enabling coordination that protects collection operations, feeding machinery that transforms human souls into navigational light. He shoulders the Vox unit and walks toward transport staging, where replacement personnel await deployment to active theaters. The sound of administrative stamps punctuates processing like funeral bells, marking transitions from recovery to utility, within systems that acknowledge no mathematical ceiling save universal consumption. The final image mirrors our opening. The hiss of rebreathers keeping metronomic time, blood running into reclamation buckets, a breath sustained in darkness through systematic expenditure of others. The ledger grows. The quill scratches on. The machinery continues,